Welcome to Around the World. Well, we start in Sudan. The civil war in Sudan today enters its fourth year. It is a war that has ravaged the country and uprooted perhaps 11 million people. It's hard to say how many have died. The former US envoy for Sudan suggests that as many as 400,000 over the 3 years the war has raged have died. Mediation efforts have so far failed to yield results, and the United Nations now says the conditions there are triggering the world's largest hunger crisis. 3 years from the start of the war, the humanitarian situation is catastrophic. This report from France 24's Solange Mougin.
It is often called the world's worst humanitarian crisis, one that officials say has been largely abandoned. Yet the devastation is staggering in Sudan. 13 million people have had to flee their homes. More than 30 million are in need of humanitarian assistance, or 2 out of 3 Sudanese.
And this year alone, an estimated 4.2 million children across Sudan are expected to suffer from acute malnutrition.
For many, escaping the fighting and the shifting zones of conflict has meant repeatedly leaving everything behind and going without food or livelihoods.
We were in al-Fasher when the war happened. The situation was terrible. Either you would find food for your children or they would go without. There are no jobs. The only aid we get is from the World Food Programme.
Aid organizations are pleading for help. The needs far exceed the funding and the donations they receive. They're also often under attack.
It is incredibly dangerous at the moment. We've seen targeting of humanitarian convoys in drone strikes, local aid responders who really remain the sort of heroes of this horrific conflict, who are most of the time the only ones accessing communities in need, are repeatedly targeted as well. So people keep saying those local responders who are hosting soup kitchens, for example, have to stop being targeted by the warring parties.
Human Rights Watch says foreign nations must put more pressure on Sudan's warring military and paramilitary forces to cease attacking AIDS groups. Without urgent action, the number of Sudanese with acute malnutrition, the deadliest form of famine, could soon hit 800,000 people.
Well, for more on that story, we are joined now on the line by Idil Absiye, who is the policy advisor on women, peace and security with the organisation UN Women. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to Around the World. It's very good to have you here with us here. We heard there from Solange about, some of the conditions many people are living in. Your organisation has been working specifically on the plight of women in this war. And you've looked especially at crimes of violence against women and girls. And there are some harrowing stories. Can you give us some examples so that we can really get to understand the enormity of this problem?
Yes, thank you very much for having me. As we enter the 4th year of the war in Sudan, what we're seeing, sadly, is a war on women and girls, and their bodies have become, part of the strategy. Sadly, sexual violence has been the blueprint and the strategy of this war, where we're seeing systematic and deliberate inflicting of terror, humiliation, pain, and control over women's bodies and girls. Just yesterday, we published a new gender alert, which highlights sexual violence, which continues to be rampant in Sudan, with the number of girls and women requiring support for GBV services nearly doubling in the past 2 years and quadrupling since the start of the 3-year war. So in terms of numbers, this year alone, 12.7 million people, mostly women and girls, require support for sexual and GBV, gender-based violence support, and that is up from 3.1 million in 2023. So we're seeing a fold increase in terms of the number of people requiring support. And we're seeing a lot of these cases happening in Darfur and in the Kordofan states, which are regarded currently as the hotspots in Sudan. And we've seen, when we've interviewed many women and girls through our partner agencies and organizations that we work with in the country, we're hearing stories and, sad atrocities of young women and girls, carrying the burden. We've heard from a young girl carrying an unwanted pregnancy, following a rape when her village was attacked by armed men. In the siege of Dilling, we saw 45-year-old women who suffered horrific violence in South Kordofan. And then we continue to hear more and more horrific stories that were coming out of the al-Fashir siege that took place in October last year. So there's, displacement is very wide, like we heard earlier. 17 million women and girls are in need of humanitarian assistance. About 4.3 of these, 4.3 million women and girls are also displaced inside the country. So sadly, there's no safety in displacement in itself. Women are being exposed and girls to violence, to rape, to abduction, to killing. And they've been targeted as they flee, as they search for food, water, or healthcare, but also within their homes. So the situation is quite worrying and continues to get worse because of the instability that is going on, the blockades that are happening, and the widespread impunity.
You talk about impunity there, looking specifically at this issue of sexual violence on women and girls. Have you found evidence that there are perpetrators on all sides of this war? And you talk about impunity. Is it possible to gather evidence so that one day some of these people might be tried for war crimes?
I mean, it's of course, it's very hard to say who is perpetrating these. I think all sides are equally, involved in the conflict, and how we're doing our work in collecting the evidence. And UN Women is very much on the ground. In Sudan, we are working with 45 women's rights organizations, helping them on the ground to deliver protection services, which include psychosocial support, supplying basic supplies to those who are in most in need, and also responding to the crisis, but also leading in the sense that they're also, seeking to promote and strengthen, cohesion within their communities and find a solution to the conflict in the country, but also equally doing the same at regional and global spaces as well, advocating for peace, for ceasefire and a de-escalation of the conflict.
Now, of course, today is the third anniversary of the day that officially, we could say that war broke out. But, largely this is a forgotten war. Such a lot of attention was paid to Gaza. I've spoken to aid workers who were quite angry at the lack of interest in this war. Why do you think that is? What can be done about it?
Unfortunately, you're very right. Sudan continues to be a forgotten crisis, and this is why we, as UN Women and our partners, we always keep Sudan high, very much on the agenda, advocating and providing spaces to Sudanese women to be able to engage in strategic platforms, to advocate for peace, and to be part of the conversation that is shaping and defining Sudan's future as we have the conversations at various levels. Like you said, today marks the third year since the start of the conflict. And today there is a gathering in Berlin that is bringing in together international actors from around the world and Sudanese to discuss, political transition, economic recovery, the humanitarian, the political aspects of the conflict. And, women are very much showing up, they're organizing, and they're ensuring that their demands and their perspectives and their lived realities are shaping those very important conversations that are taking place today, with the hopes that it will start a conversation to hopefully end the war in Sudan.
And in terms of what these women, so many of them displaced, having suffered in many cases brutal violence, what do they need now? And, your organization has called for more funding. What sort of support might that be able to deliver to them?
Sudanese women are enduring extreme hardship, like we've heard, but still are demonstrating, strong leadership and resilience. They continue to be at the forefront. They are delivering life-saving support to, survivors and their communities. They are holding their households together. supporting survivors as well of sexual violence. But what happens is that their work, unfortunately, goes unrecognized and is underfunded. So what we need is that we need as an international community to support by providing financial support to these women-led organizations who are doing the heavy lifting on the ground in Sudan to hold their communities together, but also to keep Sudan high on the agenda, not only in global spaces, but also in media platforms, and to keep the conversation going so it doesn't be left behind.
Okay, well, sadly, we are out of time here on France 24, but I want to thank you, Idil Absiye, for drawing attention to this, Policy Advisor for Women, Peace and Security with UN Women.